a chamber that is not quite as full as we would like it. We've heard lots of reports of traffic and accidents, and of course we're competing with glorious weather. And I won't complain about that. But we are delighted to have you here. I am Kim Willingham, the Executive Director of this wonderful, mighty, small and mighty organization called the Boston Debate League. To the BDL, and I see some of our amazing debaters over here. We are an urban debate league, one of 20 in the nation, in fact. And we were founded because debate is historically an activity that college and high school age white men participated in. And so urban debate leagues were founded to make debate, policy debate, accessible to Black and brown and marginalized young people. And so we are one of those organizations. And since our founding, we have gone on to serve thousands of students in nearly 20 years across Greater Boston. We do that through 3 programs. One program is after-school policy debate, in which students are grappling with real-world policy topics. We do that through our Debate-Inspired Classrooms program, through which we work with hundreds of teachers on bringing the skills of debate into the classroom. And we do that through our Resolve program. It's an asset-based program tailored for Black and Latino young men. Through all of these programs, what we're trying to do is help young people develop the transformative, lifelong skills of debate: critical thinking, evidence-based argumentation, and self-efficacy. So, why are we here tonight? First of all, I want you, without even knowing why, to give yourself a round of applause. You all look lovely out there. And this is our first in-person race equity policy series forum. We started these discussions during the pandemic when we were isolated and looking for ways to engage with one another, to talk about what's going on in the world. And so we've been doing them online, talking about everything from criminal justice reform to emerging technologies and cybersecurity. And this is the first time we're doing it in person. And we think it's pretty important to do this work. In fact, we just completed a strategic planning process. And one of the priorities that we named is that we want to amplify critical discourse in community. We see it in community all the time, in our community. We see it in the BDL world. But we think there's power in expanding these conversations beyond our world and really sparking conversation and discourse in community. So we hope that tonight you're inspired. We hope that the conversation is thought-provoking. Maybe you want to get involved with the BDL or more involved with the BDL. And in your own sphere of influence, have some conversations. Talk about what's going on in the world. How many of you look at the news or social media? Oh, no, okay, a few people? Well, I'm sure you know there's reason for us to be engaged in conversation that's healthy, productive, that is not about being right or tearing one another down, but really about how do we bridge gaps, how do we make meaning of the world, how do we problem solve, how can we just be decent human beings. And so we see that with these young people you see sitting around the room who are engaged debaters. And so we want to do that in community as well. So, before we get started, I have to acknowledge some people. Let's see, BDL staff, raise your hand, say hello, wave something. Yeah. They truly are amazing, and I said we're small and mighty, and we're having a deep impact across the city, and it happens because of these passionate, dedicated people who love young people, who are deeply committed to the work that we're doing. We also know that progress does not happen in isolation, it happens in partnership. So we want to acknowledge the partners who came alongside us today to make this possible. First is the EMK Institute. So after I get finished speaking, you'll hear quickly from Nate, who is the Assistant Director of Education here representing the EMK Institute. We've had a long partnership and he's going to talk just a little bit about that. And then after that, I have to open up my phone. I didn't even consult my notes, see that? Because I want to tell you who our next speaker is right after Nate. Sharia Wade, who is from State Street. State Street is a sponsor of this wonderful event. And Sharia, I don't want to mess this up at all, is the Global Head of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Programs and Solutions Management at State Street. She and her team drive DEI programs at State Street. It's a wonderful thing because right now we hear a whole lot of dismantling of DEI. But they're staying the course, and one of the things that they do, they have a 10-point action plan for addressing race and equity. And so you might imagine that this work that we're doing, having this conversation about race and equity and how those intersect around justice, is up their alley. So we're thankful for your sponsorship. Thank you for all of you State Street who are here. Yes. And then our friends at the firm of Latham & Watkins Law Firm. Is anyone from Latham & Watkins here yet? Okay, so they're one of our sponsors as well. So we're grateful for them. So before I step away from the podium, I'm going to ask you to do a couple of things. One, when you came in, you were given a QR code. If you have not done so, scan that QR code, the one at the top, I believe, says poll. It's a one-question survey. Take the poll, because we're going to use that data. We use data. We like evidence-based conversations, not just vitriol and emotion. And we're going to bring that information into this conversation tonight. Later on, you can scan the other code to bring questions to our wonderful esteemed panelists, who Jackie will introduce in a little bit. While you have your devices out, you can go ahead and follow us on social media, Instagram and LinkedIn, and stay abreast of all the things that we're doing. Now, speaking of Jackie, she is our wonderful Managing Director of External Affairs, and give it up for Jackie, who led our team putting this all together tonight, and she's going to come up in a little while and provide some context for this night. But we are just so grateful to have you here. I'm just glad that you're here on a Thursday evening when it's gorgeous outside. There are lots of places that you can be, but that you chose to be here with us means a lot to us. So thank you. Sit back, relax, enjoy the conversation, and imagine yourself. And yes, Sean?
What's UBI?
Oh, thank you. And one of the debaters, do you want to say what UBI stands for?
Universal Basic Income.
Thank you. Universal Basic Income. And you'll hear a little bit more about that during the conversation. Awesome. Thank you, Gabriel. So yeah, imagine yourself on the chamber. Like our elected officials. It's pretty amazing being in the space. So thank you so much. Nate, you want to?
Yeah, sure.
And then Shari, you're right after Nate. Thank you.
Keep this to 2 minutes or less, and Kim, I don't know if you want to bring Shari on afterwards, or she can just come on after me.
Right after.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, thank you so much for being here. My name is Nate Dundee. I'm the Assistant Director of Education at the Edward M. Kennedy Institute for the United States Senate. It's been my good luck to be working here since before its opening in 2015. Really pleased that the Edward M. Kennedy Institute gets to host this discussion. And I want to thank the panelists and the moderator for coming. Particularly, I hope it doesn't make them uncomfortable, I want to thank Mr. Gabriel Lemus, who I don't know personally. Partly just because he's coming here as a BPS high school senior and a veteran debater, and I don't know him, but in our education programs here at the EMK, every day, Tuesday through Friday, we have students come in, sit at these desks, and debate policy as senators and explore it under what we hope is a very empowering sort of pretense that they have taken on the role of United States senators. But the point of that is so students can do what Gabe is doing and confidently explore and grapple with these policies as themselves. So I'm very glad that there's a student who wants to do that here tonight. In 2017, through the EMK, I had the opportunity to take the Boston Debate League's teacher training course, and it was really formative. It was really fantastic. It's really informed for the past 7 years my work at the EMK. And so I'm really heartened that this partnership between our organizations has continued. It's been fun in the past to volunteer as a judge for the BDL. We love it when the BDL debaters visit our chamber, particularly during their summer debate program. That's really helped us up our game and our particular programs. We're looking forward to another visit from them as well. And I'm really glad that this rep series is having a live session here. Obviously, economic disparity is something we see when students visit sometimes, and we're really glad that they're addressing it. And that is my 2 minutes. So thank you again for coming, and we'll pass it off to Shapiro.
Hello, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Shapiro Wade. I'm global head of DEI programs at State Street. And so I always start by saying State Street is a long-term community partner. Not a long time. It's a long-term community partnership. And so, you know, all the different things that are happening with DEI today, we're very dedicated to the work that we continue to do. And so, as you that. But the 10 actions to address racism and inequality kind of really molded us a little bit more on equity in particular, just looking at Black and Latinx communities and understanding how we're serving them in different levels. That include our foundation work. And so a lot of the foundation work, we have Midori who's sitting right over here who runs our foundation. So if you are willing to actually have that conversation about how we're doing that work. We added social justice lens to our foundation pillar in particular. And so now we are able to add additional funding envelopes, right? More programs, more organizations to actually be able to fund. More recently, we released last year our civil rights audit on our business practices, which led to $100 million depository strategy to MDFIs or CDFIs and the commitment that we have there. The efforts that we've all kind of done, not only fund organizations like BDL, but also thinking about efforts where we're increasing our own Black and Latinx representation at the senior level, so making that economic impact that we know we're about to talk about, that wealth gap today and in that conversation. And so at the senior level, that was kind of something we wanted to make sure we focused on, because that's where the wealth gap will really be closed. And that led to us being named in the top 50 Diversity Inc. On the specialty list, and also we were the first GCV to have a bronze certification, MLC Black Equity at Work certification. So we are really excited about the work that we're doing. We're looking forward to this conversation, and thank you for the opportunity for even letting me speak, and share it.
Thank you, Shari and Steve, for your long-term commitment to the Boston Bay League. Again, my name is Jackie Joseph, and I'm the Managing Director of External Affairs at the BDL. And over the last few weeks, as we prepared for this evening, we conducted online polls, you may have seen, on the topic of wealth inequality. And we've learned a few things. This is a topic people want to discuss. I think that goes without saying. In one poll, most of the respondents, about 70%, believe that affordable housing is the single most important issue to address when it comes to income inequality. Interestingly, when asked about the annual income a household would need to afford a single-family home in Boston, the responses were much more disparate compared to the other poll questions. That may be something we address in this conversation today. When asked which generation was the most impacted by wealth inequality, almost 60% believe it's Gen Z, followed by Gen X and millennials. You can find a plethora of articles talking about the lack of affordable housing or the challenges to buying a home in Boston, the cost of groceries, of childcare, or the lack of equal access to opportunities, be they in entrepreneurship or higher education. Tonight, you all contributed, right? You all contributed to the poll? All right, and so we asked online, and now we want to ask in the room which policy change would make the biggest difference to promote wealth equity in Boston. And here is what you said. So affordable housing and rent control seems to be the top choice, followed by UBI. So this is a fitting way to move into our conversation, which will be moderated by Diti Kohli, business reporter with the Boston Globe and producer of the Boston GenZ video series, which discuss with Gen Zers the issues impacting them. No surprise, many of the issues they spoke about spoke directly to the challenges created by wealth inequality. We're excited to have Diti here and our panelists, which include Dr. Thomas Shapiro, a research professor at the Heller School for Social Policy at Brandeis University, whose research and advocacy focuses on racial inequality and public policy. He is also an author whose work has a particular focus on closing the racial wealth gap. Angela Brown is Chief of Economic Development at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. In her work, she has focused on bringing a race-explicit lens to economic development, believing that the people most impacted should have the opportunity to add their perspectives to the issues and solutions. And last but not least, we are very excited to be joined by our third panelist, Gabriel Ponce Lemus, a high school senior and a Boston Debate League debater. Through our partnership with Suffolk University, Gabriel participated in a dual enrollment course last year where he researched and wrote his own policy debate cases. This year, he wrote and debated his own cases on the subject of wealth inequality. And Gabriel, I'm just going to shout you out a little bit. I want to add that through our partnership with Suffolk, we have established 2 scholarships for Boston Debate League debaters. And in this first year, Gabriel is one of the recipients and will be attending Suffolk University. And before I pass it on to Diti, I want to remind you to send in your questions. On the back of your program card, you will see a second QR code. So if questions pop into your mind as the conversation is happening, feel free to send those in, and Diti will call those out. But we will also have a mic that will go around the room. If you raise your hand, we'll have someone pass that around the audience. So, Diti, why don't you get us started?
Hello, how is everyone today? All right, I didn't warm you up for me, so I got the easy part. Thanks again for coming. Like Jeffrey said, we've talked a little bit about the things that we want to cover today, but you guys are better than me, so please send in your audience questions, and I'd be happy to kind of throw them in as we go along. Just to set the stage for the conversation a little bit, nearly a fifth of residents in Boston live under the poverty line, and a lot of those folks are Black and brown. And there's a lot of work that's already being done on this issue, particularly in the last couple of years. The Boston Foundation created the Wealth Gap Partnership to increase home ownership in communities of color. Boston Indicators has a racial wealth equity resource center. And multiple cities and towns, including something Boston is thinking about, are trying to launch UBI programs, guaranteed income, to put money directly in the hands of families. And I would be remiss if I didn't also mention that the Globe is now trying to give this more space as well with our Money, Power, and Inequality team, writing about racial wealth gap explicitly and talking to people on the ground. But I think that the best way to kind of start this is to talk about young people specifically, since we are here with the Debate League. And let's kick it off talking about the role that education plays in both how the wealth gap exists and also potentially how we can reduce it. Whoever wants to kind of kick it off.
Hi, I'm happy to kick it off. My name is Angela Brown. I'm with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, MAPC, and very interested in this topic. One of the things I think about with education is, along with many other resources, access to a home, a walkable, vibrant neighborhood, ability to become a homeowner, access to some kind of interesting work or profession or something that really pulls on you that you want to become involved with. All of these things are like quality of life, and education is so important for that. It's one of those public goods that we should just all be able to access in different types of formats that meet our express needs and desires. So I'm a big proponent. At the same time, you hear the but coming. So research has shown that there's a lot of interest, right, in education as a form of uplift. But unfortunately, research has shown that education alone, meaning successfully completing K-12 and going into post-secondary, does not close the racial wealth gap. So there's research, and I'm sure you may get into this as well, from the Federal Reserve of St. Louis, others that have just looked at this in the data. Unfortunately, there's progress in making income and career moves. That certainly it has intrinsic value as a good. We all want to have critical thinking and so forth. But the data unfortunately show that as far as closing the racial wealth divide, meaning income and then savings and net assets, it's actually not alone going to be enough to do that job. So.
Great. Let me pick it up from there. Tom Shapiro again. So we're dealing with a two-edged sword here. We're talking about higher education in particular. On the one side, it's all the data, all the evidence, all the research is abundantly clear that in terms of income and wealth, the higher one's education is, the tendency is they're doing a lot better. And not just financially, but I would suggest they make better critical citizens, and they're more engaged in their communities as well. At the same time, the cost of higher education has gotten prohibitively expensive, such that the conversation should move from access or lack of access to higher education to the cost and the value proposition of higher education. And it's there because of the way education is a public good, but unfortunately, in my view, it is largely privately financed. A huge debt burden is around the necks of the current generation and those above it, and it'll be on the generation below it as well. And that is going to be a millstone around choosing their future careers and what they want to do. So education is really critically important for all those reasons. And lastly, I do want to underscore that education cannot and does not close the racial wealth gap at the same time. If we separate how important it is for individual and family mobility, that's one story. But it's not the main answer to closing the racial wealth gap. And we can talk about some of the data around that if you want to push back.
Yeah, so expanding on that, well, first of all, my name is Gabriel Ponce Lemus, and I'm a senior at Edward High School. And I believe that education does play a significant role in creating wealth gaps, as access to a quality education can be used as a strong indicator for future economic opportunities. Unfortunately, not everyone has access to a great education, as when I was doing research from a debate tournament, I found multiple articles, for example, one by The Hill, where it was reported that Black students and Hispanic students are more likely to not be recommended for AP courses compared to their peers with similar transcripts. This means that people of color are already facing challenges before they graduate high school and move on to college. And many colleges look at their transcripts and their AP classes as an indicator of whether we accept these students or not. So that means that people of color are already put at a disadvantage of getting into these elite colleges compared to peers with similar transcripts. So this means that education is just playing a significant role in creating a wealth gap, specifically racially.
Absolutely. I think the question that comes to mind for me is, there's already more difficulties for Black and brown students to get into college. There's these hurdles. And then we're talking about the exorbitant cost of tuition, which has only gotten more. I think recently, just this year, there are now almost half a dozen, I think, New England schools that have reached the $90,000 a year mark in terms of tuition cost. The question for me is, then, are those tuition costs playing a role in almost allowing the racial wealth gap to endure? Are they increasing some of the challenges that are already facing these families?
I mean, I can say yes. Tom is absolutely right, Tom. That the part of the equation is on graduating from college, what is that debt load? Well, then the first, 5, 10, 20 years of one's career, you're actually stocking away money towards paying down that debt. And so it's just simply a math issue of, yes, you're making increased earnings, because education does mean you're more attractive in the labor market, have more choices. At the same time, a portion of that increased earnings is going to pay down these big debt burdens. So that just means your savings at the end of the day is going to be affected by that. So it's a math issue. So it's both the access and how do we fund higher education.
So let me add to the higher math problem here, the legacy and the history of race and wealth in the United States. And one of the ways that this plays out in the educational sphere is that not everybody can afford the $90,000 or $80,000 yearly tuition. Some take those student loans out. Some are really fortunate, like I was, in that they have parents who can pay the tuition for them. Now, I graduated a long time ago, and tuition was very different. But when I graduated college, and in fact, when I got my PhD, I didn't have any student debt. And that's not because I was smart or anything like that. It was because tuition at a state university then was affordable, and my parents could afford to pay that tuition for me. So that's the way, one of the ways that wealth stratification, if you're fortunate enough to come from those families, you don't have to pay all or even some or the majority of those tuitions, and you come out on the other end without that debt burden. And so with that higher income, you now have more latitude and more freedom, if I can use the air quotes, to do with that and make of your life what you can, versus the person that's got the 20 to 30-year debt load.
So if we're talking about the way to then address this problem, I think Dr. Shapiro, you pointed out so much of higher education is privately financed and kind of out of the hands of government intervention and what individual students can do. I'm curious if we're talking both at the high school level in terms of what are some of the policy things we can do to make this a little bit more egalitarian, and then also with higher ed, what should we be thinking about as possible solutions? That's a tough question, I know.
No, it's not.
No, it's not. Okay.
The answers are easy. We don't have the will to get there. Higher education should be considered a public good. It's an investment in the society. It's an investment in the people that are going to help make that future society hopefully better. And in many other societies, it's part of the public treasury that pays for higher education. In the United States, we have, along with a few other countries, Australia, Great Britain, etc., we operate on a very different model. We operate on it's the individual that needs to pay. Almost the full tuition in that. So one answer goes back to some of the campaign arguments of 4 and 8 years ago around free higher education. And I think we're making a lot of progress with community colleges and state universities. But we need to push that trickle and make it a flood moving forward. The other side of that, I get really riled up and passionate, is student debt cancellation. For all of those, in my view, that didn't have a great choice and had to take a student debt to finance their higher education because that's the ticket to the jobs, the middle-class jobs that they wanted. Senator Warren and others, Senator Schumer, one of my congresspeople, Ayanna Pressley and others have been pushing bills around student debt cancellation. I had the honor of several years ago helping Senator Warren's staff do some modeling on what amount should be canceled. And lastly, because words matter, and I think we're going to talk about words and narrative later, please, no one say student debt forgiveness. Forgiveness implies people have done something wrong, and you're supplicating to the more powerful to let you out of something. It's about canceling the debt. Thank you.
I'm thinking about every time I've said forgiveness before. I will say I am curious what our resident incoming college student has to say about some of these costs in this competition.
So I'm very aware that every year tuition prices are rising, and I've had a lot of friends that have been accepted to colleges such as Boston College and Brandeis University, but unfortunately, when they get their financial aid package, they find out they have to pay $20,000 or $30,000 a year, and that's just unsustainable, and they can't simply afford to go there. So unfortunately, because of these rising prices, they can't go to these elite or dream schools that they've always been so fond of and worked 18 years for, just to find out they can't be able to go to these colleges. And I feel like this should be an issue that we should tackle on because, for example, in Europe, college is like very affordable and doesn't cost nearly as much as it does in America. And their student loans programs are much sustainable than we are in the US. So clearly, if it's being done in Europe, clearly the United States has the power to make education more accessible to people of color instead of working as a barrier that we see currently in the United States where the majority of the higher positions in our society are not people of color.
Go ahead.
I'd like to ask a question, Gabriel. There is a new program that the governor announced a while ago called Mass Reconnect. I don't know if this is for everyone, but I was just wondering if anyone has thought about it. It's free community college. So that's one, so maybe 2-year. I do know a friend who obtained a 2-year diploma and then transferred to an elite college, and sort of that first 2 years was much, much cheaper. But I feel like there hasn't been as much making that seamless, like the pathway to move, like you do well in community college and tuition free, and maybe that way get a better savings to put into the last 2 years. What do you think?
I think that's really great. I've had some friends who have gone to Bunker Hill Community College and then after 2 years transferred to, I believe it was Boston College. And it's true you have less tuition when you pay 2 years at Boston College, but also it's very hard to transfer from community college to a school like Boston College. You have to work really hard and it's not guaranteed.
I'd say the last thing I would ask on education is an audience question. Based on your knowledge of higher education and its correlation to the racial wealth gap in this country, would you recommend the, quote, average black or brown high school student attend a four-year college? The only thing I would add to this is to say that I think a lot of the times it comes down to an individual decision. I feel like I've seen a lot of studies about more and more students kind of across the spectrum going to vocational school. I think that seems to be a trend partly because of the price of college, but I'm curious what our panelists think. The question, would you recommend that the average black or brown student attend a four-year college now?
I say unequivocally yes, but guardedly about how to fund it. But we know that education has so many other benefits. It's a public good. We are critical thinkers. We can participate in different kinds of walks of life as far as career. It's got multiple different benefits. What form that looks like, I have a family member who is doing very well who went to a certificate program and did it as a working adult. It's fine. This person's probably making more than I do, so it's fine. There's multiple different options, but I think the right to get an higher education for various reasons just may not come out as much as a asset building strategy. This is what I'd say. What do you think?
I think it depends case by case because there are some people who I know prefer to go to vocational school rather than a four-year institution because they feel like for them to get their dreams and goals accomplished, they're better off going to vocational school. But I also know people who simply don't go to college just because they can't afford it. So you also have to put the cost into perspective.
I think, Gabriel, I think that hits on it. I think there's a push-pull phenomenon operating here, where higher education has become essential, required for middle-class lifestyle in the United States. I say higher education. For me, that also means apprenticeship, credential programs, vocational. That is post high school, post secondary. Is becoming much more mandated to succeed in this economy, and we need those intelligent and skilled workers as well. At the same time, the part of the push-pull is precisely what we've been talking about. Higher education in universities, four-year universities, has become so expensive that we're pushing people out who might have thought about, the $30,000 here, the first year, it's not going to get cheaper, and they may be front-loading the tuition discount anyway, so we don't know what's going to happen. Helps to push young people into maybe higher education modalities that is not their ideal.
I think it's interesting that it seems like the conclusion that we've landed on the education front is in some ways government intervention. It's controlling the cost of college, it's expanding and access to community college. And so I'm curious, particularly from the poll that we did, what are some of the other government interventions that we think play a significant role, or could play a significant role in shrinking the wealth gap? I mean, I think one of the ones that people have been talking about a lot recently is guaranteed income program. So let's start there. Is that a framework that might work? How are people testing it?
Do you want to start? Yeah.
Thank you. So when I was making my case for my debate tournament, I would do research on examples where guaranteed income programs are being used. And one example I ran across is one in Chicago, where they tested a pilot with 5,000 Chicago citizens had the opportunity to apply to this program to gain an income of $500 per month. And the report found that most of these citizens use this money to buy necessary needs. For example, like groceries or clothes, or even used for rent. And this program was so successful that about a month ago, actually, the mayor of Chicago announced that they want to make this program a little bit more permanent and to allow more than 5,000 people to use this program. So I feel that if the US or Boston, for example, can implement this program into more low-income communities, we can have more people of color have more money so they can be able to pay their rent or buy their basic needs or pay for a college education.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's very similar programs in Cambridge and Chelsea as well, but the Chicago one seems like it has particular strength behind it, and I think support in the community.
I'm very encouraged with, and by the way, with apologies to everyone, you're going to hear us go flip back and forth between guaranteed basic income and universal basic income, and people are using both terms. Sorry for the confusion.
I promise it's all the same.
It's all the same. And these are programs that maybe is $200, $300, $400, $500 a month without a categorical restriction. It doesn't have to go to housing. It doesn't have to go to the utility. It doesn't have to go to child care. It's like flexible, recurring funding. And there's a lot of interest in it because sometimes it feels like when you're in various public safety net programs, as they're sometimes called, you're constantly having to do paperwork and recertify, and I've worked a lot in affordable housing income certification. It's just so much. This is not that. It's very flexible. And Gabriel, you mentioned it. There was a lot of fear that because of the no strings, that poor people don't know how to, this is a stereotype, it's wrong, it's false, it's unjust, but there's a stereotype that poor people don't know how to use their funding, and the research has shown, just like you said, folks are using it for things they need, and what you need in 1 month might be that back utility bill, and what you need the next month is to fix the broken car so you can get to your job. Those things. That's the basis of the guaranteed basic income. I think it's very promising.
Yeah, it's an idea that currently, I hope it's not just a flavor of the month, quite seriously, but really has been spreading across the United States. And when we get a little further along in the conversation, when we ask ourselves, what can we do? I think there's a lot of engagement and lobbying that can happen around guaranteed income. But let's move back and separate two for a moment. I mean, what do we have here, guaranteed income? The brilliant idea that one of the problems of poverty is people don't have enough money. Imagine that. And imagine $500 to $1,000 a month we see in some cities, where some people go crazy about the idea, because how can you possibly give anything away for free, except for tax relief for the wealthy? But leave that aside for the moment. How can we give anything away for free? And if you give people that money, you remove the incentive to work. And that's been one of the main objections. The research has shown compellingly to this point that in fact the opposite occurs. People may in fact take more time out of the labor market to find the job they really want. And they tend to stay at that job longer. So poverty in the past in the United States and elsewhere has been a tool that's tethered people to accepting almost any job. And one of the things that guaranteed income does is it provides not only the financial capacity, but it provides a kind of economic and social freedom to maybe look a little longer, take a little more time, and try and do what it is that you really want to do. And finally on this, I just hope that the pilot projects and the demonstrations become sustainable and no longer pilots and demonstrations. We're seeing some incredible results out of Stockton, California, out of Jackson, Mississippi, out of St. Paul, Minnesota, and other cities. Boston and Cambridge needs to be added to that pile of successes.
An audience question on this, and I think partly this ties back to what Gabriel said about the fact that all of these UBI pilots show that when people are given open use of this money, like you were saying, that it does go towards necessities. But this is a great question as we're doing all these pilots. What does success mean for a UBI program, and how do cities really evaluate that as they're trying to build that into their framework as Boston is right now?
Yes. So what I view of success of one of these programs is seeing, I guess, more people of color into education institutions like colleges. By the way, that's like access, public access. You can Google Boston College or Boston University and see the demographics. I feel like seeing more people of color in these institutions is a success, or seeing more people of color in like higher positions as a success, or just I guess also less crime could be a success. Yeah.
Anything to add?
I mean, I think that it's going to be a pretty important period upcoming with some of the research, and just a word about this, because it is kind of a tough thing. So Cambridge and some other cities are doing the pilot programs, and they're having to do what's called random assignment, which means that if you sign up, you're not guaranteed a spot. You have to take each second person gets the UBI, and then someone else does not get the financial aid, and then they go into a long-term study. It's helpful because it will help us answer exactly that question over time, but in the short term, my heart goes out to someone who's, I heard about this program, and then you have a 50-50 chance that you might not be in it, and so that's a little tough. Over time, I think we will see things like what Tom talked about more career and job satisfaction, something that pulls on me, I'm passionate about. I can take the time. More ability to select career or business opportunity or higher ed opportunity that might be a larger commuting distance, because I need to have access to a car, be able to keep it up, or other transportation options that could be more expensive. Commuter rail is not cheap, but if you have the ability to move more around the region, you just have many more options. Those type of things, I think we will see better, more gratifying kind of results from people in these programs, hopefully.
It's a great question of how, what does success look like in a program like this, and it should be asked of any pilot or demonstration or any idea. What does success look like? The traditional metrics are the relatively simple ones. Has it helped with food security? Has it helped with, what has it done to the child poverty rate? What has it done to the adult and community poverty rate? Those are all the traditional metrics that are, as a researcher, they're really easy to get to. But it's the storytelling. It's the qualitative ones that pull at my heart, if you will. And I recall in particular one of the first evaluations came out of Stockton, California, which had one of the first guaranteed income projects. And it was a mother talking about how for the first time she could sit and read to her child at night and didn't have to have that second job. Quantify that. You know, it's hard. Not really, because that's some of the good stuff that we want to see, that I want to see come out of programs like that. And it's also the mother in this instance, it was a different mother out of Stockton, talking about, for the first time I could go to a PTA meeting. I didn't have to, that third job I didn't have to go to anymore. And those are the kinds of successes that I think will make us a better society.
It feels like being a more involved community member, a more involved person in your own life, which a lot of times is what poverty steals from you.
Could I
Yes, go ahead.
to play a little bit of devil's advocate, since we are today. I mean, I think one of the reasons I believe there's been such interest in GBI, Guaranteed Basic Income, Universal Basic Income, is the rise of the gig economy. And just a lot of jobs don't have stability, and you mentioned having second and third jobs. What about that? That's another option, is remaking the arrangements about employment, that there should be more full-time, you get benefits if you are part-time or full-time. It's not as dependent, this idea that we have to hustle and have 2 and 3 jobs is sort of some of the appeal, I think, of taking the pressure off. So what if we had more of full employment and fair employment and living wages, all these thoughts? So that would be a different way of tackling some of these issues. What do folks think?
At least one of the audience members agrees with you, because there's a question here that says UBI is dope, but what is even better is adjusting minimum wage to inflation. So whoever submitted that, you guys are on the same wavelength for sure. And Dr. Shapiro, you kind of mentioned flavor of the month when we're coming to policy changes. I think one of the other ones that's been brought up a lot and that some folks voted for on the poll is baby bonds. Just a basic definition for people, that's essentially a government trust fund set up for usually low to middle income families at birth, with the idea that those children would be able to access that money at 18. And I think usually the framework that Massachusetts studied 2 years ago was allowing people access to that money from 18 to 35. So do you think that that could be something that could help, reduce the racial wealth gap?
I can kick it off. I have the great honor and privilege of serving on the Baby Bond Commission for the state of Massachusetts. And so there were way too many details to work with. I'm more of a grand concept guy, and wanting the big boxes to work with. So the basic concept is a citizenship birthright at birth or coming to the United States, irregardless of citizenship status of those parents. That was a stumbling block in this state, by the way, and it's been a stumbling block elsewhere with baby bonds and other programs as well. We'll table that for a moment to take that up. By the age of 18 or so, given what the design of the program might be, and so this is the Senator Booker design of the program, that fund can be around $45,000 to $50,000. Everybody gets the same amount at birth, but then it gets scaled or titrated according to family income or family wealth. So those in families that are in greater need get more in year 2 and in year 3, and it continually builds that way, the interest builds. Now, I also want to be real, because we've talked about the cost of higher education, that $40,000, $45,000, $50,000, might buy you a year or 2 of a private university, if that's the way you choose to go. So, baby bonds, I think, are an incredibly aspirational mechanism to think about. The reality is, it doesn't exist anywhere on the ground. The state of Connecticut has had a lot of problems with it, but finally they're getting it off the ground. Washington, D.C. Got more rhetoric than actual policy program with baby bonds off the ground. Massachusetts has had a lot of difficulties with it. The initial financing mechanism, sorry about the weed, I'm about to throw at people here, was to be a bond. Until the bond people told us, you can't do that. Because if you make a bond, it's got to be universal, and the design you're talking about, it was going to be scaled, so that was off the table. Baby bonds, I think, are a great aspiration that we need to make much more of a reality.
I think one of the things we talk about with these kind of innovations and really innovative policy is if we're really serious about closing the racial wealth divide, it's not just going to be one size fits all, one singular solution. It needs to be a kind of a layered approach with a wedding cake of different things going on in there, some frosting, some cake. So what I really like about the baby bonds is 2 things. One, that in some ways it's very similar to Social Security. So people know, like Social Security, when you get to a certain age, you get access, at least for the time being, to a stream of income. There's like rules of the road that's sort of predictable. You can kind of organize your life around the idea of a certain life episode, retirement, that there is some kind of appropriate benefit for you. Same idea that there's a sort of a social insurance that says when you reach 18, and it could be available thereafter, but at least at some point in your life when you're starting out your professional adult life, whatever that might look like, here is a small nest egg to kind of get going. That's one. So this sort of concept of this is a moment in life where assets can really be helpful. It's, yes, small dollars. The second part is what I just said, assets. It's not just a monthly, sort of recurring small amount of assistance. It's a little bit of a chunk that you can really put towards something that is more future-facing. Down payment for a home. That actually could make a big difference toward a home. Is it starting a business? It could really make a big difference towards starting a business. That type of thing. So those are some thoughts. I think, having some economic stability and then an asset come to your way when, particularly if you are in a family that is not going to inherit wealth from parents, we've got to fix that. There needs to be some benefit for folks, everyday people. What are you thinking?
Me personally, I'm not a big fan of baby bonds because I've seen one argument for baby bonds saying that, well, with baby bonds, you can pay for college. But how it works is that FAFSA determines how much income you make. And if all of a sudden you're earning this income at 18, the IRS are going to say, hey, this kid is well off. He doesn't need that much help. So all it's going to do is increase tuition, make sure you have more money, but you have to spend that money on college. So it's not going to solve anything in that aspect. And on another aspect, I was asking my friends, hey, what do you think of baby bonds? And my friend was like, oh, I have an uncle who was a baby bonds. And I was like, oh, what did he do with that money? He doesn't know. Because there aren't financial literacy programs for a lot of people. And what's the point of having money if you don't know how to use it properly? I've had an NFL player who used to play for the Patriots come to my school and do an assembly. And he explained to me that financial literacy is very essential to people because he earned millions of dollars playing in the NFL, but he's had people go broke spending those millions of dollars, because what's the point of having money if you don't know how to use it properly? So I'm not a big fan of baby bonds.
We are going to practice our debating. I have two responses for you. One is what I was mentioning earlier about a predictable program. You know, we know Social Security is coming, retirement income. There are programs that help educate us to plan for that and make sound financial decisions so that you get the best, you know, financial outcome for your financial situation. And there's lots of different, you know, what retirement age, blah, blah, blah. So, but there's lots of resources. Were this to become a really a sure, predictable policy, I do believe that those kinds of programs could be created so that we don't, you're right, you don't want to displace the financial aid that otherwise would come to the person. So that's one, is how to, you know, make it more predictable and plan ahead and make sure that those financial supports are there. That's one. Secondly, I feel like we've done some asset building programs. They've been small dollars, small scale. A lot of, you know, promising research. So this would be things like the Children's Savings Account, which the money can only go towards education. It's not a baby bond, and they do tend to be smaller dollars. A zillion years ago, we had the IDA programs, right? Those were a little bit more flexible, smaller dollars. But there was something about the predictability of knowing at some point that this is coming my way and folks can plan for it. There was some progress made around planning for it. So those are my two responses.
Well, my response to that is, what you said sounded very nice, but I'm not sure how exactly it will be implemented, because I know there's a lot of folks out there, especially in my city, who how to explain this? It's very hard to explain to a lot of youth how to properly use money. So, for example, a mom with a little kid can be like, hey, save this money, these are $20, these are yours. But the kid could see like a candy bar and buy it. And then you can see a bag of chips and buy it. And like there's this temptation here where all of a sudden the $20 bills are gone despite hearing what your mom said.
So I think those are some really sound and very wise points, which is one of the reasons we had this conversation over lots of hours in the Baby Bond Commission that was designing for the state, and it's exactly the reason why if the baby bonds gets going in the state of Massachusetts, it is going to be tied to financial education. That's age appropriate, that's appropriate to the kind of asset that people want to purchase, whether it's business, a home, higher education, and it would not be mandated, but would be made available by professional and community advocates. We're trying to keep it away from, hope there aren't any people in the room, the financial literacy vultures that want to get into everything, and that make the case that people don't know how to spend money, they're frivolous, and they need our professional help. I think there's a lot of data from guaranteed income and elsewhere where, for the most part, families, and especially low-income families, that have to really understand what budget priorities are, do a really good job of getting to the end of the long months, the months that have 31 days, and 30 days, and still have decent food for themselves and their children.
I'm going to ask one more question and then release the mic for audience questions. There's a bunch of great ones piled up in here, so if I haven't gotten to it, please feel free to ask. I think as we pass the mic around, where we seem to be reaching a point of tension is with the implementation of these programs. We're talking about guaranteed income, baby bonds, what are they actually going to be used for? What is it going to look like? Can we talk a little bit about some of the barriers that exist for a lot of the programs that we've talked about, and what are some of the solutions to those? And I'm going to pass this off as you guys talk about that.
I mean, I think there's a big barrier with many of these concepts in terms of bringing them to life and getting them passed, whether it's in a city council action or whether it's in a state legislation. With federal, we came pretty close actually to getting permanent status for what's called the Children's Tax Credit. And there was a lot of work around making that a refundable credit that could actually look a lot like a GBI or a UBI. And we had this briefly during the pandemic, and it reduced child poverty in this country by half. We could do this, right? And so, but unfortunately, long story, that the politics of Congress didn't support getting that through. But anyway, so one of the barriers I do think about is just this scarcity mindset. And I think we all owe it to ourselves to really look into that and bring some critical thinking. There's this notion of, government doesn't have enough. I'm a taxpayer. There's so many things that take away, that utilize the taxes, fix the roads, fix the tea, this, that, the other. There's this mindset that there's not enough resources. We owe it to ourselves to really look into that and kind of refute that. It's just not true. There's so much wealth, particularly in Massachusetts and in state and local budgets. There's places that we have to go. There's so much tax expenditure. Some years ago, you were involved in the Hidden in Plain Sight report. That stuck with me all this time. How much we give away through tax credits to corporations and others, or to higher income families. So anyway, food for thought. I think we have to turn that mindset around. We do have abundance and we do resources for these programs.
Yeah, I think it's more than food for thought. I think there's a festival, there's a feast that needs to go on there. My theory of change really revolves around community engagement and activity and movement building. And it's not, a professor and a debater and a Globe reporter and somebody else that's going to sit in front of you and make things happen. It's a community that gets fired up, that understands what the stakes are, and that knows how to make the case to bring that to public attention and then to the electeds, and to force the electeds to have that conversation. Finally, I think it's really important to think about how we're sitting here talking about the challenges, the programs that make a lot of common sense to us, but what the burden for us is that we have to prove something. We have to have demonstration programs. We've got to run these for years. They've got to be double-blind, random assignment. They've got to be the strictest standards of scientific research. And so we have all these guaranteed income pilots. We have children's savings accounts. We have child tax credit. We now might have baby bonds in one or two places. The contrast is that when some politicians come along and suggest tax relief for the very wealthiest, there's no double-blind study. We don't put 100 really wealthy people in Montana and give them the relief, and another 100 people and don't give them the relief. And see what happens. The point is, it's about political power and will, and that's what's missing.
Audience questions? We have people with mics.
You mentioned a number of policies. I have a lot.
You were ready though, I appreciate that.
Well, you mentioned a lot of policies that are really about individual in many ways. And I'm looking at the systemic issue of income redistribution, wealth redistribution. We recently just passed the Fair Share Amendment in Massachusetts. So I'm just curious, talk about that and other big policy questions, like what do you see in Boston or in other places? The responsibility of the large not-for-profit institutions to help be problem solvers because they are sitting on incredible wealth.
Do folks know about the Fair Share Amendment? This is sometimes referred to as the millionaire's tax. And, but I guess fair share. I'm dating myself. But the idea, this is a great example of what you're talking about, movement building, because it's not like folks in the legislature, or many of them, woke up one day and said, oh, I think we're going to have a progressive tax policy in the state of Massachusetts. No, it was outside, community and labor and other voices that said, This is, other states have a progressive tax structure, they have more resources. This is a fair and just thing to do. It will help fund education more equitably, K-12 meaning, and many other things that our Commonwealth needs. So, great example. I did pose that other policy bucket earlier in response to the GBI, UBI, the guaranteed basic income of if we had less extractive employment, right, and more like fair labor standards, it might actually help with that stable income, some decent, wages, compensation. It should healthcare always be, the quality healthcare, I should say, be always tied to one's status as being employed or not? Can we think about that link? Make healthcare a little more portable between employment? That type of thing. So I think there are many policies that would sort of, I guess, raise the floor of well-being for all. That would be my thought on that one. What do you think?
We've not had a chance yet to talk a whole lot about community wealth building. I think we need to connect the dots around land trusts, for example. We need to think about what are some of the solutions to extremely high cost of housing and affordability in metropolitan Boston. We need to think about community wealth building opportunities, and I'm trying to watch my words here, in some communities that think a residence has to have 2 acres of land before it can be built on, that is zoning codes. Kind of the trick question is how many municipalities are in metropolitan Boston? It's the same number of zoning codes that we have.
Yeah. Thank you, Tom. You passed me the softball. The Metropolitan Area Planning Council is very involved with helping local communities to implement changes, reforms to their zoning that would allow for more multifamily. Right now, you're absolutely right, there are many communities that don't allow, a 3-bedroom apartment living. What is this allergy to apartment living? There's many, high quality, there should be choice in communities. And so the agency is helping many communities, particularly where they also have what's called inclusionary zoning, so that affordability is written in. It's not just about making the structures more flexible so that there's apartments, clusters, different kinds of things, not this big mansion type of development and sprawl that results sometimes from those patterns of development. So we have an interest in supporting many communities that are willing and trying to pass those zonings and focus where they also have inclusionary housing that guarantees to set us up with affordable units.
I would like to use my community of Everett as an example. In Everett, we're building affordable housing around our city. But when you look at these prices of these affordable houses, the rent is like $2,000 a month. So when you really explain affordable, you read the fine print of what counts as affordable. Because sure, for maybe someone making $200,000 a year, $2,000 a month is affordable, but for someone making $30,000 a year, that is not affordable at all.
Do you have time for one more question? There you go.
Hello, hi. You guys brought up some great topics and points today, and I just want to bring that up. But I feel like when it comes to race inequality, it comes to the thought process of understanding that money itself is resources that provide options. And it's been in a system that's been built in America that brown and black people are not allowed to have options. And because of that, we have a system that has been brought up into 2024 that still limits a lot of group of people based on the same thing. And I think, Doctor, you had, Thomas, that you mentioned a point about accountability, holding our government members accountable, because we have people in office supposed to be representation of us, the people, but they're not fighting for us at all. Our concerns, our desires are not being met, and we're not holding them accountable. And I think it takes us to actually having to say something. And these conversations are great, but we have to take it to them to actually like, this is what's needed, this is what the community needs. But education of literacy in terms of finance has to be taught at a young age. A child at 3 years old understands the concept of money. So why are we waiting till 18 to tell them checking account imbalances? It doesn't make sense. That isn't a gap right there being set up. So we have to dismantle this system that we have in place and rebuild it. And I think it's the thought process, what we're being taught, what people are being taught, like, there is enough money. And the money that's going to be given back to the people are the people's money. It's not like they get making up money. This is our money that we're fighting for. And I understand a point that was made earlier about, oh, if you give people money, they're not going to work hard for it. But it's not that they're not going to work hard to get more money, it's giving them in a position where they can. Because especially now with AI, if you guys are aware, they're taking on a lot of jobs, that's labor work. So now these people who are now lack of education, don't have the resources, where are they going to be going? So it's just like a system of class that we're just shifting people around, and it's this understanding when we really want to break it down and take it to the next level and really find the real core of these issues. I wanted to bring that up.
Time for one more.
Thank you for your input and your thoughts. Appreciate it. So my question is, given my experience with Boston GenZ, which is wonderful and is throughout the country, I'm European, and like Gabriel said, my thought here would be not to discount the initiatives that are being proposed or already put in place. But I feel like here in the States, it's always about pruning the tree, but the roots are not taken care of. So why isn't there an education system that allows from elementary, middle school, and high school to have kids like the kids that I work with, not work with, but I do some work with Boston GenZ who are so interested in being critical thinkers and so forth. So why, the question is, how can you, if you are involved with the government, help change the vision of education? Because you're only thinking about higher education, and education starts at elementary, middle school, and so forth. Thank you.
I mean, I think it goes back to, we're not going to make real progress with one, I love your tree pruning metaphor, fixing one branch that's growing the wrong way or something like that. It's going to take a few, or many perhaps, different reforms, and I think some people talk about policies that are kind of performing the current structure, and then what's more transformational. I think that's maybe your question, and I think that was the point you were making too. I would hold that, the Fair Share Amendment, forgive me, is a great jumping off point for a lot of this work, making sure that there's accountability about how those new resources get used when that fully comes to light. And then, ensuring more of a fair wage, livable wages, and working conditions. Those are kind of more cross-cutting. That would be at scale. That's my thought. And then maybe marrying that to some of these, these sprints that we want to run around asset-based programs, or figuring out the school funding, higher ed funding formula that really works for the most people. I think that's something that would be great. Those are a couple of thoughts. But it's not just one we call that magic bullet. I hate that expression. No one single thing is going to fix this.
I really like your question. That's a question that has come up in my mind several times. And what I think is that I feel like the government should invest more in local organizations or more after-school programs. For example, I'm going to use my city of Denver as an example. We have programs such as Luma or La Comunidad, where there are programs that provide tutoring, mentorship for like a lot of youth so they can aspire to be something when they grow up. And in a historical context, I think it was yesterday, in my Black Studies class, I learned about the Black Panther Party. And in the 60s, the Black Panther Party offered free breakfast or free guidance and free tutoring to a lot of these kids in low-income communities. So I feel that if the city of Boston can implement these similar programs, we can see a lot of youth, specifically youth of color, with guidance become something when they grow older.
Thank you. Yeah, well, thank you for that, ending on that note, Gabriel. Thank you all for participating tonight. Thank you for your questions and your reflections. I feel like I got a few things, learned a few things tonight. And, you know, I think one of the things we can leave here is really what does success look like and what steps can we take to engage. I think we mentioned a couple of ways that we can do that and bringing our concerns to our electeds, participating in organizations that are doing this work. So before we go out into the reception, I do want to again thank our sponsors. Conversation. And, you know, before we head out, you know, if you have enjoyed this event, if you want to learn more or to get involved or volunteer, like our volunteer back here, Lisa, who is a judge with us during tournament season. If you just want to give and support the Boston Debate League, please visit us at bostondebate.org. We have several staff here. There we go. We have several staff here, as you saw this evening, so if you have any questions, please feel free to come up to one of us. And if you want to continue talking about tonight's topic, our panelists will be here for a little bit, and, you know, feel free to talk to them. But thank you all for joining us.